Hey there! The Scandinavian defense is a very solid and sometimes annoying defense to play against because black develops the queen early on, which very often is a bad idea in the opening. So in today's video we're gonna learn a few ideas and traps to play against it. So let's start with the first one. After e4 and d5 we get the Scandinavian defense. Here we're gonna take on d5, and after queen takes, knight to c3, queen to d8 is a very common line. And here the most common idea is to go d4, but an interesting idea is to delay this idea. So here we can play the move bishop to c4. In any case, I want to show you that the main line here goes d4, and after knight to f6 and knight to f3, black very often develops the bishop to g4. So having that in mind, we're gonna play the move bishop to c4, which is a very natural developing move, inviting black to develop the bishop after knight to f6, and here we're gonna play knight to f3. And if black goes for bishop to g4, which is a very typical idea in the Scandinavian, here we have the very pretty knight to e5, where we sacrifice the queen, but we are attacking the bishop and we're also putting pressure on f7. So the game is pretty much over. The main line could go bishop takes d1, and here we have a very pretty checkmate after bishop takes. The relatively best is to go queen to c8, defending the bishop, but here we could simply take on f7, and after king to d8, we can simply attack the bishop, for example with f3, and here we have an extra pawn, and black's king on d8 is looking very shaky. But another way to continue for black would be to go bishop to h5, trying to hold the position, trying to defend f7, but here again we're gonna sacrifice the queen after the fantastic queen takes h5. Now we get an extra piece, the game is pretty much over, and if black takes on h5, we again get a checkmate on f7. So this idea of developing d4 is actually quite interesting. So if you play this, I'm pretty sure you're gonna win a few games with this line. And here the best continuation for black is to go e6 or a6. In any case, going e6 will block the bishop, so here we could try to fight for an advantage. Because if black insists with this idea of developing the bishop here after bishop to f5, we have an interesting idea of going knight to e5, putting pressure on f7, and after e6, go queen to f3, we have very active pieces. Now let's move on to the second trap, which is a riskier one. I suggest that you try it occasionally, mainly in games with quick time controls. After e5, d5, we could play the move knight to f3, sacrificing the pawn e4. This is known as the Tennyson gambit. And after black takes the pawn, now we go knight to g5. White's play doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but the main point is to either take on e4 or put pressure on f7, as we'll see. Now this is objectively not the best line because black could give the pawn back by going e5. This is one of the ways for black to get a very good position. And after we take on e4, go f5. Black is doing quite well here. But your opponent might try to defend the pawn, and one way to do that could be to go queen to d5. In a way, it's a very ambitious move because we're not only defending the pawn e4, we also attack the knight on g5. Very often, mainly in the middle game, counter-attacking is the best defense, so this is what black is doing here. And here we can go d3. This is the main idea for white in this position. And if black takes on d3, now we take with the bishop, we develop the bishop. And in this position, black should continue developing, for example, go knight to f6. And here we can castle, and white gets a fairly decent compensation from the pawn. White is gonna get a very quick development. But after bishop takes d3, you probably notice that the pawn on g2 is hanging. So black could get greedy and take this pawn, but this is actually quite bad for black, because here we could play the move bishop to e4, attacking the queen. The queen has only one square to go, which is queen to g4. And here we're not going to be able to trap the queen, but we could simply trade queens. And now after bishop takes, the pawn on b7 can be captured, and more importantly, we're going to take the rook on a8, and white is going to have a better position and a material advantage. The next trap also involves the Tennyson gambit. After e4, d5, knight to f3, black takes on e4, and after knight to g5, knight to f6 is another natural way to defend the pawn. And here we can insist with this idea of going d3, either to get the pawn back or to gain development after black takes on d3. And black should be doing fine here if black is careful. For example, black could play knight to c6, keeping an eye on the queen. As we'll see, this is going to be quite important. Or even go solid and play a move like e6, Here we could go with knight to c3, and we have slightly more active pieces for a pawn. But a lot of your opponents, actually most of your opponents, will play the move h6 here, which looks very tempting, kicking back that knight on g5. But here we have the crashing knight takes f7, forking the queen and the rook, and if black takes on f7, now there's an idea to create a discover attack against the queen. One of them is to go bishop to c4, giving a check, but in that case the king can go back to e8, and the other one is the move bishop to g6. We sacrifice the bishop, but now we take the queen on the 8. So white has a decisive material advantage, but just in case, here black would try the very interesting move e5, actually setting a trap, because here taking the bishop on c8 would lose the queen after the move bishop to b4. We give a check, and now we collect on c8. So after the move e5, we could simply retreat with the queen to d1 or d3 for example, or we could also castle, and now the move bishop to b4 is not going to win the queen anymore. And before I continue with the last trap, today is a very special day, it's Black Friday, so I'm excited to offer you a massive discount on all of my premium courses and ebooks. So if you want to take advantage of this offer, feel free to check the link in the description. So in the last trap, after e4, d5, we take and queen takes, knight to c3, queen to a5 is another way to move the queen, and here we're gonna play the move d4, and if black goes for this very typical knight to f6, and after knight to f3 go bishop to g4, one of the main plan by black is to go knight to c6 and castle. So here we could continue with the move h3, which is the main move in the position. If black takes, this would simply help us develop, or after bishop to h5, go g4, this is the main line, and then go knight to e5. But if you feel a bit unsure about pushing your kingside pawns, you can simply play the solid bishop to e2, breaking the pin, and then after knight to c6, develop the bishop, keep an eye on the d4 pawn. And now after black castles long, black's idea is to put pressure on d4, and the main idea is that if we castle here, the move e5 is a bit annoying because there's pressure since the pawn on d4 is pinned. But here white has a very interesting move, because in a way we want to punish black for developing the queen too early. We can play the move knight to e2 with the idea to bring the knight to the queen side. And this is a very flexible move, as we'll see. We also attack the bishop on g4, and after bishop takes, we don't want to play knight takes e2, which is just very passive. We want to go queen takes. Now we're ready to castle either short or long, depending on your style. We also have an idea to attack the queen with the knight on d2, but this seems to blunder a pawn on d4, so black might be happy to take it after knight takes d4, but here after bishop takes and rook takes, knight to b3, we're gonna get a fork, and we're going to win an exchange. So here after a move like queen to b6 and knight takes, we have a much better position, but in any case just want to mention black's best resource in this position, which is to take on c3. The knight was controlling e4, and after pawn takes, go rook to e4. So here black is going to get the queen back. We're still gonna get an extra exchange, for example after rook to d1, go rook takes and queen takes. Here white has an extra exchange, black has a pawn in return, white is still a bit better, pressing for an advantage, but at least black has some chances to survive. So hope that you enjoyed these traps, and feel free to try them in your games. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.